Hello, Ross, and thanks for talking with me at Hybrid Publishers about your newest novel, Going Out Backwards, A Grafton Everest Adventure. Now, although I'm talking to you today, you're only half the story. Going Out Backwards was a unique venture in that it was created through a joint effort between yourself and the utter hilarious Ian McFadyen. Can you please tell me a bit about this collaboration?
Well, what happened was that I've been working on Going Out Backwards for about 2 years, and I had all the characters worked out, and I had the beginning worked out and the end worked out. But I wrote and wrote and wrote, and what was conspicuously missing was a proper plot, of which I've never been any good. Carl Harrison Ford, who's edited my other Grafton Everest novels, has often helped me with plots. And it was actually Carlo who suggested, why not contact your friend Ian McFadyen, who'd actually painted my portrait for the Archibald Prize in 2013. And it was a brilliant idea because the collaboration between Ian McFadyen and myself has worked out wonderfully. I haven't enjoyed working with anybody as much as I have with Ian McFadyen. And as most of your listeners will know, he was in charge of the comedy company, created the character Kylie Mole, and I can never forget McFadyen being David Attenborough. So McFadyen and I, he came down and we had about a 7-hour meeting in Sydney. He lives in Brisbane these days. And we worked out that I would give him all the characters, the beginning and the end, and all that I'd written. But what he did was to plot it wonderfully. It's plotted rather like a Wodehouse novel.
Okay, so Grafton Everest is an extremely provocative character. The Daily Mail said about him that he is a slob, making Les Patterson seem like a class act. So where did the character of Grafton Everest come from?
Well, the character had always been in my mind. That could be if I let myself go. Because he's very, very fat, he's gluttonous, he's tremendously lazy. But what happened was an ex-student of mine at the University of New South Wales, we went into Mozambique through Swaziland at the time of dual control. I remember being stopped at the Swaziland border and I said, how are things now that the Portuguese have gone? And the border man said, it's the same pile of manure, only the flies are different. But as we were driving in, we were the only Europeans driving in. Europeans were escaping Mozambique. And there was this huge truck sped past called Grafton Everest Removals. And for some reason, the character Grafton Everest, that connected. The idea of Grafton's mother, who sort of is in the background like a volcano. So the actual name came from Grafton Everest Removals, whites fleeing Mozambique just after the revolution. And we drove into Maputo, and it was rather like After Us the Deluge.
Right, that's a really interesting connection. So Going Out Backwards is very much a political satire, an outrageous reflection of the crazy world that is politics. Considering your heavy involvement and education in politics, was writing a satirical piece a natural progression, or did it come as a sort of surprise?
Well, what happened was the first Grafton Everest novel that I wrote was during the height of the dreadful Bjelke-Petersen regime. And I was under a lot of attack. I'd been sued for libel for a couple of histories that I'd written. And writing satire, political sexual satire, allowed me to say things about the Queensland government, that dreadful Bjelke-Petersen government, that I couldn't do through non-fiction. So, again, it's very much political sexual satire. It's very much over-the-top satire, rather like Tom Sharp. And it's interesting, or I find it interesting, that up to now, and I'm hoping things are going to change, up to now, the Grafton Everest adventures haven't done very well in Australia, but they've done extremely well in Great Britain and South Africa, especially after Howard Jacobson spent a whole page in the London Observer headed Conquering Everest. I think this is the funniest Grafton Everest adventure yet, by far. And it's wonderfully plotted, thanks to Ian McFadyen.
So why do you think it did so well in these other countries as opposed to Australia?
Well, I think it did so well in South Africa because that's where the Tom Sharp novels. And as the proprietor of Hybrid, Louis de Vries, asked me, he said, was Tom Sharp an influence? And indeed, he certainly is an influence. and so they've done very well. Corgi Bantam brought out a couple of Grafton Everest novels, Push from the Wings and Entertainment and All About Anthrax in their Corgi Bantam series, and that did very well.
Great. Well, speaking of Tom Sharp, I mean, he has been listed as one of your influences. Who else do you look for sort of comedic influences? And
P.G. Wodehouse
okay.
and Tom Sharp would be... I mean, I think Barry Humphries is a comic genius, and I was actually with Barry the very first time Sir Les Patterson appeared. We were both living in Sydney, and he rang me up and he said, listen, would you come out with me to a RSL club? I think it was at Rooty Hill or some dreadful... He said, I'll be back in a couple of minutes. And then this character appeared. This is before Les Patterson became a vaudeville character with the huge penis and the dribbling. And this chap gave a drunken monologue about time waits for no man, and it took me about 5 minutes to realise it was Barry, and this is the first time that Les Patterson actually performed in public.
Right.
In the first Bazza McKenzie movie, I was one of Bazza's friends waving him off at the airport. I was in it for about 60 seconds.
Well, thank you very much for talking with us today. And
an absolute pleasure.
Going Out Backward, Grafton Everest Adventure comes out this spring.